She said it the way people say things they've already decided are true. Still doing that little online thing, Maya? Soft laugh, wine glass halfway to her lips. The particular smile of a woman who has never once considered that she might be wrong about you. 14 people at that table heard it. My husband's parents, his 2 brothers, their wives, 4 of our kids between us all, old enough to understand tone, if not the full weight of what was underneath it. I set my fork down. I looked at Danny across the table, at that easy, certain smile, and I said, yes, still doing that. Then I picked my fork back up and kept eating. 11 weeks later, the acquisition closed. $289 million, all cash offer, announced on a Thursday morning in a press release that went out to 43 business publications simultaneously. My phone did not stop ringing for 6 days. Danny's did not ring once. Nobody was calling to congratulate her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Subscribe first, right now, before I take you back to that dinner table and everything that came before it. If you have ever built something real while someone nearby called it little, this channel is yours. Hit that button and stay with me, because this story starts years before that dinner, and the dinner was just where it ended. My name is Maya Osei. I was 34 that year, and the company I'd built was not little. It had never been little, not even at the beginning when it lived on a second-hand laptop on a folding table in the second bedroom of the apartment where my daughter learned to walk. Let me tell you what those early years actually looked like, because the word startup gets used so often now that people have lost the texture of what it means to build something from nothing with no net underneath you. The apartment was in a part of the city where the rent was low enough that I could justify not taking a salary for the first 8 months. The folding table was from a thrift store, $12, one leg slightly shorter than the others. I wedged a folded envelope under it in October of the first year and never bothered to fix it properly because the envelope worked, and time was the thing I had least of. Kwame was working full-time then, pulling the entire financial weight of our household while I built. He'd come home in the evenings and find me exactly where he'd left me in the morning. Same chair, different problem. He never once told me to get a real job. He brought me food when he knew I'd forgotten to eat, set it beside the laptop without interrupting whatever I was mid-sentence with. That kind of partnership is either present from the beginning or it isn't, and we had it from the beginning, which is the only reason any of this was possible. The thing I was building was a platform, a marketplace for small artisan goods with a logistics layer built in from the start, because the problem I'd seen in every similar business was that the selling was fine, but the shipping was the place everything fell apart. I'd worked in operations for 4 years before striking out on my own, unglamorous work that nobody at dinner parties wanted to ask about, and I understood supply chain at a granular level that most marketplace founders didn't. That knowledge was the actual competitive advantage, though it would take 2 years before anyone outside the company understood that. Month 11, I made my first hire, a woman named Sefa, 26, who'd been running customer service for a mid-size retailer and was ready to do something that felt like it mattered. I could only offer her 70% of her current salary. She said yes in under 48 hours. Month 18, we had 8 people and a real office, a shared space with 3 other small companies, the kind where you share a kitchen, and occasionally each other's printer paper without asking. That office smelled like someone's lunch by 2 p.m. every day, and the Wi-Fi dropped during video calls at a rate that should have broken us, but somehow didn't. Month 30, we had the first licensing deal, a regional carrier in the Midwest who wanted to use our logistics routing software for a pilot program. That deal paid salaries for 6 weeks when we needed it most, and more importantly, it was proof the software wasn't just useful inside the platform. It was useful outside it. That changed everything about how I saw the company's future. There was a week before that deal closed that I've never told anyone about except Kwame. The carrier had gone quiet for 9 days. No response to Preethi's emails, no return calls. We had 11 employees by then, people who'd taken a bet on me and were cashing paychecks that depended on revenue I was not yet sure was going to arrive. I sat at my desk that week and ran the numbers every morning with the specific focus of a person who cannot afford to panic. 11 families, 11 sets of rent and groceries and lives built on the assumption that what we were making was real. It was real. The deal came through on a Friday afternoon. I read the confirmation email, sent a message to the team that simply said, "We got it," and then I walked to the kitchen and made a cup of tea and cried, alone, for about 3 minutes. Not from relief exactly, from the weight of those 9 days leaving all at once. That kind of week doesn't show up on a press release, it doesn't show up at a family dinner, but it is the company. That week is what the company is made of, in the same way the building is made of what happens between the blueprints and the ribbon cutting. By the time Danny said little online thing, we had 43 employees, 2 million active users, 11 carrier licensing agreements, and an acquisition offer on the table worth $289 million that had been in negotiation for 8 months. She didn't know any of that. I had never told her. And I need to be honest about my own role in that silence, because it matters. This is a thing I have turned over many times since that dinner, sitting with it the way you sit with a mistake you made with good intentions. I built my company quietly, deliberately quietly, not because I was hiding anything, but because I come from a family where you don't talk about money, where you don't list your wins in conversation, where the work is the thing, and the results are between you and God and your accountant. My grandmother ran a shop in Accra for 30 years. She sold fabric, the kind of fabric that takes a week to choose and a lifetime to wear. Her shop was modest from the outside, the kind of place you'd walk past if you didn't know. Inside, she had relationships with every major supplier in the region, a waiting list for certain prints that stretched months out, and a reputation that brought customers from 3 countries. When she died, the people at her funeral were fabric merchants who'd flown in from Lagos and Dakar to pay their respects to a woman who'd never once told a customer what she had in the bank. She said it was nobody's business. She was right, but she also had a different problem from mine. Her customers came to find her. In Accra in the 1970s, word traveled on its own. Nobody needed to announce. What my grandmother didn't have was a sister-in-law who thought she ran a little market stall. I inherited her instinct completely and applied it incorrectly. I kept the quiet, but I skipped the part where the truth arrived on its own. In a family of people who weren't going to seek out a press release, who weren't watching tech news or following business publications, the truth only arrived when I sent it. And I never sent it. That was my mistake. I own it completely. Not because I owed Danny an explanation of my net worth, but because people you love, people you eat with every November, deserve to know the real shape of who you are. Not the resume, the real shape. And I'd been giving them a silhouette for 9 years, and then feeling tired when they called it small. My grandmother would have corrected me. She would have said, "I don't talk about money, but I let people know what I do. There's a difference." She knew every fabric merchant in the city knew her name. She just didn't hand out her books. I know that now. So nobody in my husband Kwame's family knew what I had. They knew I ran something online. They knew I worked from home, which in certain minds means not really working. They knew I had employees, vaguely, in the way people know things they haven't asked follow-up questions about. They did not know how many. They did not know the revenue. They did not know about the Series B, or the distribution deals, or the partnership that had been quietly in negotiation for 8 months with a company whose name most of them would recognize from their own shopping carts. Kwame knew. Kwame knew everything. He is the kind of man who understands that what his wife does is her business, and also that he married his wife specifically because of who she is, which includes what she does and how seriously she does it. He had been on that folding table journey with me. He knew every number. He also knew, sitting at that dinner table when Danny laughed and said still doing that little online thing, that his wife would handle it. He did not reach over and squeeze my hand. He did not correct her publicly. He trusted me, which is the highest form of love I know, and he waited. I'll come back to what happened at that table, But first I need to tell you about Danny, and about the particular kind of person who says things like that, because understanding her is the only way this story makes sense. Danny had married into this family 3 years before that dinner. She'd married Kwame's older brother Kofi, who was warm and generous, and had the specific blindness of a man in love with a woman who made him feel capable by making everyone else feel small. Danny worked in marketing. Good salary, solid company, the kind of job that carried weight in a room. She was smart. I want to be clear about that, because I have no patience for stories where the villain is simply stupid. Danny was smart. She was strategic. She knew how to read a room and position herself in it. The problem wasn't intelligence. The problem was that her intelligence had curdled into a habit of measurement, of looking at every person she met and calculating where they ranked relative to her, and then acting accordingly. She'd sized me up 2 years before, at an early family gathering. I'd come from a long day of work, distracted, answering a quick email on my phone in the kitchen while the food was being laid out. She'd made a comment then, too, light and laughing. "Some people can never really switch off," said warmly, aimed precisely. I'd looked up, smiled, put my phone away, and gone back to the table. She filed me under manageable, and that file never got updated, because I never corrected it. There'd been other moments. A spring birthday gathering where Danny spent 20 minutes asking my brother-in-law Kwaku about his medical practice, genuinely interested, good questions, leaning in. Then she turned to me and said, "And you're still with the website thing?" And turned back to Kwaku before I'd finished answering. The website thing? I'd had 14 employees at that point, and had just closed a deal that would put us in the black for the first time. Another family dinner, late fall, where Kofi mentioned casually that a friend of his had asked about the best platforms for selling handmade goods online. Danny had immediately started listing options, fluent and confident, platforms she'd read about in an article somewhere. Not once did she glance at me. I was sitting 4 feet away. My platform was one of the ones she mentioned, accurately described, correctly positioned in the market. She did not know it was mine, because she had never asked what mine was called. I said nothing. When Kofi's friend needed a recommendation, Kwame quietly gave him my contact information later and said his wife had built the platform Danny had described. I heard about the conversation secondhand, from Kwame, the next day. He'd found it funnier than I had. Every family dinner after that, when conversation turned to work, I said just enough to answer the question without giving the picture. "What does your company do?" "We're an e-commerce platform with some proprietary logistics software." "Oh, interesting." And then she was already turning to someone else, because that answer didn't rank, and she'd moved on. What I hadn't told her, the platform had 2 million active users. The logistics software was licensed to 11 regional carriers. We'd had 4 acquisition offers in 18 months, and turned them all down because the numbers weren't right. The 5th offer was the one we were considering, that Thursday in November when she asked me across the table if I was still doing that little online thing. 8 months of negotiation in my body. 43 employees whose livelihoods were part of every decision I made. Lawyers and bankers and months of due diligence, all of it running underneath a dinner where the bread was going around and the candles were lit and the family was talking about holiday plans. And she asked me if I was still doing that little online thing. I said yes, still doing that. Here's why I didn't say anything else in that moment, and I want you to understand this because it's the part people always get wrong about situations like these. It wasn't pride, it wasn't strategy, in a cold, calculated sense. It was something simpler. I did not owe Danny Osei-Mensah an explanation of my life, not one I hadn't offered. She'd had 3 years to ask. She'd been at every family gathering, every birthday dinner, every casual Sunday, when the conversation could have turned toward any of us and gone deep, and not once had she directed a real question at me. Not what do you love about your work, not what's the hardest part, not even a casual how's business actually going. She'd asked about Kwame's work. She'd asked about Kofi's last project, in detail, with follow-up questions. She'd asked the children about school. She had never asked me anything that required me to be more than scenery, so when she asked the little online thing question, I had no information I owed her. She hadn't done the work of being curious, and curiosity is the price of access in my life. You want to know me? Ask. Nobody gets the answer without the question. I said yes, still doing that, and I kept eating. Let me stay inside that moment a second, because the inside of it matters. The table kept moving. Someone passed the bread. Kwame's father said something about the weather. Kofi started into a story from work. The dinner continued the way dinners continue, when nobody quite knows what to do with a moment, except let it pass. Danny's smile had smoothed back to its usual version. Wine glass back up. She was already talking to the person beside her, easy and confident. A few sentences past me. What I felt was not humiliation. I want to be clear about that, because I think people assume the small comment would land as devastation. It didn't. I'd been building something real for 9 years. I knew what it was. A word chosen at a dinner table didn't change the number in the term sheet sitting in my lawyer's office 5 days old. What I felt was something simpler. Tiredness. Tired of the version of myself that existed in that room. The reduced version. The one I'd allowed to stand in by never correcting the record. That tiredness was useful. It told me the silence had started costing more than it was protecting. Kwame's knee found mine under the table. Just a graze. Just enough to say I'm here. I saw it. I pressed back once. That was everything. The dinner moved on. Dessert came. The kids got loud. Danny held court at her end. Warm and funny. The version of herself she ran on in company. And I sat at my end and ate my dessert and thought about the call I had at 8 the next morning with the acquiring company's CFO and whether we were going to push back on the earnout provision or let it go. Kwame's knee found mine under the table, just briefly, the way it does when he's proud of me for something I'm not sure anyone else saw. I pressed back. That was enough. The acquisition had been 11 months in motion by then. The other company, I won't name them here, but you would recognize the name from your own daily life without having to think hard, had approached us through an intermediary the previous January. They wanted the logistics software. They wanted the user base. They wanted what we'd built and they were willing to pay for it. And the question had only ever been how much and under what terms. My lead negotiator was a woman named Preethi who had the specific quality of patience I deeply respect in anyone, which is the ability to sit in a room with 4 lawyers and a hostile offer and emerge on the other side with everything she'd gone in for while making it look like they'd reached it together. I'd found her through a recommendation from another founder who said, simply, she will not flinch. That was accurate. In 11 months of negotiation, I watched Preethi not flinch approximately 40 times, in rooms where flinching would have cost us millions. Those 11 months ran underneath everything else I did. Underneath the family dinners and the school pickups and the ordinary Tuesdays that looked like ordinary Tuesdays but contained, somewhere, a call with Preethi or a document to review, or a decision to hold on a term the other side was pushing on. The particular strange thing about running a deal of that size, in parallel with a normal life, is that nobody around you knows the weight you're carrying. I'd sit at Kwame's parents' dinner table and smile and pass the food and answer questions about whatever was in the news, and inside my head, I was holding an earnout provision we hadn't resolved yet, and a due diligence question that had come in that morning and needed an answer by Friday. You carry it alone, mostly, because you can't explain it without explaining everything, and explaining everything to people who haven't signed an NDA isn't something you do. Kwame carried it with me, in the way he carries everything with me, which is steadily and without drama. He didn't ask for updates. He trusted that I would tell him what he needed to know. When I was tired, he made dinner. When I was tense at a family gathering, he stayed close without hovering. He is the architecture of my life, in the same way the logistics software was the architecture of the platform, invisible to most people, load-bearing all the time. The earnout question resolved itself by the end of October, in our favor. We signed the term sheet November 4th. The closing was scheduled for the Thursday before Thanksgiving. The family dinner was November 9th, 5 days after we signed. 8 months of negotiation concluded. The deal was real. The number was final. It was already done when she laughed and called it little. I thought about telling her, in the moment, not the full number, just enough, a single sentence that would have rearranged her face in a way I'd have felt for years. I decided not to, not because I'm a saint. I want to be honest. The thought crossed my mind and I enjoyed it for about 4 seconds, but then I thought about what happens when you deliver that kind of corrective in the middle of a family dinner. Someone cries. Someone defends her. Kofi gets put in an impossible position. My mother-in-law spends the next 3 months quietly managing the aftermath. The acquisition news becomes a family conflict instead of a business announcement, and I'd worked 11 months for the announcement to be the story, not the drama it came wrapped in. So I said yes, still doing that, and I waited. Preeti sent the press release draft on Monday. We reviewed it Tuesday. Legal cleared it Wednesday. It went out Thursday at 8 a.m. to the 43 publications on our media list. I was sitting at my desk, real desk now, in an actual office with my name on the door, when the first call came in at 8:04. A journalist I'd worked with twice before, efficient and direct, wanted a comment for a piece she was filing by noon. I gave her 12 minutes and a quote she could use. I then sat very still for about 30 seconds and let the room be quiet. 9 years. The folding table. The envelope under the leg. Sepha's first day. Nervous and bright. Learning our systems in a corner of the shared office while someone's lunch heated up nearby. The licensing deal that saved 6 weeks of payroll. The 4 offers I'd turned down because the numbers weren't right. Preeti, patient across 100 conference calls, turning bad terms into good ones. $289 million, all cash. The number that the work had always been heading toward, even when nobody but Kwame could see it. I let myself have that 30 seconds. Then I answered the next call. By 9, my phone had 47 notifications. By 10, my head of communications had a running list of 12 interview requests and was triaging them by relevance. By noon, the story had been picked up by outlets I hadn't even had on the original list, the kind of secondary wave that happens when the first wave is big enough. Kwame had forwarded me 4 messages by mid-morning from family members who'd seen the news. Was this Maya's company? The one she runs? Is that the same Maya? $289 million. Is that right? The message I remember most clearly was from my mother-in-law. She sent it to Kwame and me together, all capitals in the way she types when she's emotional. My God, I thought it was a little website. She followed it with 3 prayer hands and a long row of hearts. That woman. I adore her completely. Kofi called Kwame at 11. I heard the call from the kitchen, Kwame's patient voice, a long pause, and then Kwame saying clearly, "She's been building it for 9 years, Kofi. You just weren't asking." I wrote that down in my journal that night. You just weren't asking, because that was the whole thing, distilled to 5 words. Not cruelty, not malice, just the specific cost of not asking. 3 years of dinners where I sat 4 feet away, and nobody asked the right question. Danny didn't call. She texted at 2:14 that afternoon. Congratulations, wow. 2 words. From a woman in marketing who understood, professionally, exactly how thin that was. I looked at the message for a moment, sitting in my office with the afternoon light coming in sideways, and then I put my phone face down and went back to the calls that actually needed answering. I want to pause here because I know what people expect from a story like this. They want the confrontation, the moment in a room where I finally say everything I'd swallowed over 3 years of dinners, the look on Danny's face, the apology maybe, or the scene, the high drama of someone understanding in real time that they had the entire picture wrong. What actually happened in the weeks between the press release and Christmas was stranger and quieter than that. My sister-in-law Adwoa, Kwame's youngest sister who had always been kind to me and had always vaguely sensed there was more to my work than the family understood, texted me a day after the announcement. "I always knew it was big," she said, which wasn't exactly true, but was said with such warmth that I thanked her anyway. She then asked if I'd come and talk to her daughter's business class at the community college. I said yes immediately. I've never been able to turn down that kind of ask. My mother-in-law called, properly called, not texted, 2 days after the news. She spent the first 5 minutes apologizing for not knowing, for all the times she'd introduced me at church as Kwame's wife who does something with computers. I told her she didn't need to apologize, that I'd been private about it, deliberately, and she said that was no excuse, that she should have asked more questions, and then she cried a little and asked if I would come early on Christmas Day to help her with the jollof because she wanted to talk to me properly, without everyone around. I said yes. I showed up at 9 in the morning, and we stood in her kitchen for 2 hours, her cooking and me keeping her company, and she asked me everything she'd never asked, how I started it, what the early days were like, what the number meant for our family, what I was going to do next. Real questions, the kind that required real answers. I talked more about my work in those 2 hours than I had at 5 years of family dinners combined, she said, near the end, stirring something on the stove without looking at me. "I'm proud of you." I should have said that a long time ago, even when I didn't know the whole story. You've always been worth knowing. I didn't cry, but it was close. That was the thing about the announcement, the thing nobody warns you about when you build quietly, and then one day the quiet ends. It doesn't just change the way the people who dismissed you see you, it changes the relationships that were already good. It opens space in them that should have been open before but somehow wasn't, because everyone had been working from an incomplete picture, including the people who loved you. Kofi called me directly, 2 days before Christmas. Not Kwame, me. He'd found my direct number in the family group chat and just used it, which told me he'd thought about it before dialing. He said he'd been thinking about what Kwame had said on that November phone call, that they hadn't been asking. He sounded like a man not entirely comfortable with vulnerability, and trying anyway. I have a lot of respect for that specific effort. Comfort with it takes practice, and most people don't start until something makes them. We talked for 40 minutes. He asked how I'd developed the logistics software, whether I'd built the tech team internally or brought in co-founders. He understood operational complexity from construction. He could follow the architecture of what I'd built in a way that most people at those dinners couldn't have, and the more I explained, the more his questions sharpened. By the end, he was asking whether I knew anyone doing similar infrastructure work for commercial real estate logistics because he'd been circling a specific problem for 2 years and hadn't found the right solution. I sent him 3 names the next morning. He's still working with one of them. That is what asking looks like. 1 phone call, 1 decision to actually look. 3 years of dinners, and it took a press release to make it happen, which is the part I carry with me into every room now as a reminder of what silence costs on both sides. What actually happened was quieter, and I think more true, and the part with Danny happened at Christmas. Kwame's family gathers at his parents' house every year, the big meal, everyone present. I almost didn't go, not because of Danny, but because the acquisition close had been exhausting, and I was still in the deep recovery of a person who has been running at maximum capacity for 11 months and has finally been given permission to stop. But I went because Kwame's mother makes a jollof rice that I have been thinking about since the moment I met her, and because family is family, even the complicated parts. Danny was already there when we arrived. She greeted the kids, greeted Kwame, and then she turned to me, and for a second she just looked at me, and in that second something was different. Not warmth exactly, but the absence of the particular certainty she'd always carried around me, the certainty that she'd taken a measure of me and found me manageable. That certainty was gone. In its place was something I hadn't expected. She looked like a person who didn't know where to put her hands. "Maya," she said. "You look good." "Thank you," I said. "So do you." We stood there for a moment with the sounds of the house around us, Kwame's father's voice from the other room. The kids already running somewhere upstairs, the smell of his mother's kitchen doing what it always does, which is make the whole house feel like somewhere worth being. Then Danny said, "I owe you an apology for what I said in November, the little online thing. That was dismissive, and I want to say so directly." She said it cleanly. No preamble, no framing, no cushioning language around it. Just the fact of the thing. I looked at her. I'd watched this woman work a room for 3 years, and the one thing I'd never seen her do was stand in front of someone without her armor fully on. Right now it wasn't on. She was a person standing in front of another person, doing the uncomfortable thing because she'd decided it needed to be done. I gave her the truth back, which was, I accept that. Not it's fine, because it hadn't been fine. Not, we're good now, because we weren't yet. Not entirely. Just, I accept that. Clean and real, and leaving room for whatever came next. I should have asked, she said. I knew you ran something. I assumed. She stopped. I assumed a lot of things I hadn't earned the right to assume. That was the most self-aware sentence I'd ever heard her say, and maybe she'd said other ones over the years, to other people, and I just hadn't been in the room for them. Maybe. I was trying to leave room for that possibility. It goes both ways, I said. I made it very easy not to ask. I'm private about my work. Maybe too private, with people who are family. She nodded slowly. Can I ask now? And she did. Over dinner that Christmas, seated across from me at the long table, she asked real questions. Not brilliant ones, not always, but genuine ones. The kind that meant she was actually trying to see me rather than locate me on a map she'd already drawn. She asked about the logistics software specifically, what the problem was that I'd set out to solve. She asked what the due diligence process felt like from the inside. She asked, in a lower voice at one point, whether I'd been scared when I turned down the first 4 offers. I told her the truth. Yes, scared. Because every no you say is a door that closes behind you, and you have to trust that the reason you're holding out is real, and not just stubbornness. Preeti had talked me through that more than once, on late calls when my confidence in our own number was lower than it needed to be. Danny listened. She didn't perform listening the way people sometimes do. She actually listened, questions arriving from what I'd just said, rather than from a list she'd prepared in advance. At one point, she made me laugh at something she said about her own experience presenting a marketing pitch to a room of people who'd already decided they knew better, and the laugh was a real one, my actual laugh, not the company version. People can change. Not all the way and not immediately, and not without something forcing the update, but in the specific way of a person who has received new information and chosen to do something with it. That is enough. That is, honestly, quite a lot, if you've known people who receive new information and choose to do nothing at all. Here is what I want to leave you with, and I'll keep it as plain as I can. Building something real is not loud work. It is years of early mornings and hard calls and decisions that no one else sees you making. It happens on a folding table with one short leg. It happens on the phone at midnight with your CFO. It happens when you turn down an offer that looks like enough money because you know, in your bones, that it isn't the right number yet. It is not glamorous in its daily form. Daily, it looks like a woman who works from home and seems a little distracted at dinner. But the work is the record. That's what I learned on that Thursday morning when the press release went out and 43 publications ran the number at the same time. You don't need to announce what you're building. You just need to build it long enough and well enough that the building speaks for itself. The people who sized you up and found you small will read the press release. They'll stumble across the news. They'll sit across from you at Christmas and realize they had the entire picture wrong. And when that day comes, you won't need to say a word. Here is the other thing I learned, the harder one. Staying quiet about your work isn't noble if it lets the people around you make decisions based on a lie. When I let Danny's picture of me go uncorrected for 3 years, I wasn't being humble, I was being unavailable, and unavailability has costs. It costs you the chance to be known by people you actually have to share a table with, sometimes for the rest of your life. I'm not saying to announce your salary at Thanksgiving. I'm saying that when someone calls your life's work little and you say nothing, you aren't protecting your privacy. You're confirming their version of you, and you can do better than that. So can I. I stayed on with the acquiring company for 18 months, in the advisory role, doing work I found genuinely interesting. After that, I started something new. Smaller at first. The folding table is back, metaphorically. Kwame brings me food when I forget to eat. Sefa joined me again, 4 months in, which told me something about what we'd built together the first time. I don't know what the new number will be. I do know it won't be little. None of the work ever was. Subscribe to this channel, please. Not as a favor, but because if you are the person doing the real work while someone at your table decides what to call it, you deserve a place where your work gets to have its actual name. Hit the button. Come back for the next one. The quiet ones are not going anywhere, and neither am I. My name is Maya. I built something, and I am still doing that.